Alright, so we're on 140 BPM. This is the template that you heard in the intro. You can grab this at the top of the description on my website. Definitely grab it. It's a great template. You can make your first really good hard house track today with this. Got everything you need. Links at the top of the description. Thanks for the support. We're at 140 BPM, and the first thing I got here is the synth kick. So yeah, I synthesized this kick using operator. You can see we're just playing B. There's these little like dunk. I noticed that in a lot of the Kyle Starkey tracks. You know, and those little kind of fills as well. Simple stuff, but you also want to make sure not to do it too often, right? This is like only once every 4 bars. You can do once every 8 bars even. Like, I wouldn't be doing that too much. Although at the same time, you could also get creative with a track where maybe it does it a little bit too much, and then that's kind of like what you want to play with, right? So it's up to you. As far as the sound goes, the way you make this with operator, it's just one sine wave. You give it the attack, but then turn this initial up, so you kind of get like an extra length here, and it gives you more body to the kick. Then you got a little high pass filter. So to show you what that does, here's without it. With it. So it's not doing much. It's only at 45, but it's getting rid of, first of all, some of that like real like sub, right? Then we are also using a little bit of a hard shaper. So you can hear it's like that last extra thing to just give it the really more like 909 kind of sound, right? Then we got a pitch envelope, and this is how you get this sound. Right, and the secret is the 2 tiers. Now, I spent a lot of time dialing this in. Particularly, you're going to play with the attack, the decay, and then the peak. Those 3 are like what's going to define the kick. And then that's it for the kick. Then we have our bass line. So we're in the key of D sharp minor in this track, and this is just playing the chord progression. It's going root, 5th, 6th, 4th. It's a pretty common deep house progression that's like used. You've heard this a million times, you know? Just like UK dance music in general uses this progression a lot. Another thing you'll notice is that the bass and the piano play at the same time. You know, if you want a tight mix, a lot of times it's not just about mixing. It's also about like the things that you are mixing need to be tight sonically to begin with. So if you have these playing kind of like the same pattern, it makes one really cohesive track. Now, for the sound on this one, it's made with operator. Again, we're going like deep house influence here, so I'm doing this deeper FM sort of organ bass. You can see it's just a few sine waves at different octaves. The secret here is you don't want to use that much of the second one. That's how you retain the bass, basically. Like, if you turn this down and then up, so you get more harmonic content, but you don't get that bass still. So the secret is put this low, and then use the other oscillators to add harmonic content. And that's how you can still get the bass, but then have the harmonics. We got that going into a low pass filter with an envelope, you know, making it nice and deep and plucky. The other thing is like with all the other synths going on and all the drums, like there's a lot in the mid-range already. You really don't need this to be too much of like a saw bass or anything like that. I just have that side chain to the kick. You can see we got the high pass on the side chain, so it's just side chaining to like just that little click there. And then we have our piano, which is actually 2 layers. Now, if you look at this, it's playing the same progression I just talked about. We're going root, D sharp minor, 5th, A sharp minor, 6th, B major, and then the 4th, G sharp minor, right? Really simple. Just like those are just basic chords. And then I've got the root, 5th, 3rd. That's sort of like the order. But then on top of that, we have these melody notes. Right? It's just going dun 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 dun. It's like kind of sticking on one note. And I threw in these F sharps too with those chords. But yeah, it's kind of like a melody and a chord progression working together, right? Now for the sound, we got 2 layers. So the first layer is going to be the actual piano you hear. I did this using a sample because it kind of gives you more of that like old school, kind of more like M1 sort of, you know, like just the sound of like one piano sample being played across different keys, as opposed to like, I mean, you could use something that's like, you know, a really perfect multi-sampled piano library, but I think if you really want that old school sound, try just taking one piano note and dropping it in a simpler like this. Now, the other thing is the release. You're going to want to turn that up. If you don't have that, it's going to sound kind of flat. So that just brings that up. We have a delay. Here's without it. With it. So what this is I have this unsynced. We're at a really fast 9 milliseconds. I have the filter all the way up, and then we're using the ping pong mode. And what this does is it creates a stereo widening effect. You go from this to this, and it really helps it stand out in the mix too. And that's a great way to do that just with Ableton stock stuff, right? Then we got a bit of reverb. Really short though, right? Like you want this like punchy, but like it's got a bit of room. You know, it's like one of those. We got this being sidechained, and then we're just high passing it. And here's the second layer. It's playing the same exact MIDI, right? I just literally just copied that on there. And this just kind of fills in some of that like lower mid-range on the sound. And it makes it a bit more juicy too. Like if you really listen to these together, you know, you go from this to this. Right, it's almost filling in like those watery frequencies. So what this is the saw wave and a little bit of a square wave, not that loud, inside a wavetable. Going into a low pass filter, it's got this envelope 2 on it. So that's where the burp 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 is coming from. We got the unison all the way up, and then we're just side chaining it and high passing it. I think when you do layers like this, a thing people do a lot of the time and they end up messing up their tracks is like, oh, I want a little bit of reverb on my piano. Okay, well, I'm gonna put that same reverb on every layer. Well, you gotta think about what the layer is for. Like in this case, this is the piano. We want that to have the reverb, so we can reverb that. You don't really need this thing to have reverb, right? And then like if you try to put reverb or delay on there, now all you're doing is like kind of separating them, you know, or if we put like some delay, it just kind of messes the whole thing up. So I think when you're doing a layer like this, it's kind of like the background layer that shouldn't really be even noticed, you know? It's just going to be like, wow, there's this really fat, nice, warm, modern piano sound. You probably don't want to worry about like delay and reverb. Just try to make it fit in with the other thing. Then we have our string. So this is the famous deep house sort of string, right? Just sits up top there. It's playing A sharp, which would actually be the 5th of the key that we're in. So that's another like jazz kind of thing that comes from deep house, and honestly just like a lot of UK music, right? But what it's doing is we got this analog patch. So normally you would use like a string, but my goal here was to try to get like the sound of a string sample, but just using a synth. So we did that with analog. What I'm doing here is we got a saw wave and then a square wave an octave down. The saw wave is going to this first filter, and you can see that's got like an envelope opening it up. And then the square wave goes into this formant 6 filter. So you can barely hear it, but it's giving you that overtone. Right, so you see it's kind of like we're trying to create the sound like what's going on with a string, or like with live bowed strings, but with the tools inside of a synthesizer, right? So you can also see the second oscillator has a little bit of a pitch thing. So it kind of goes like real quick at the start, and we have a little bit of an LFO on that pitch too. So even that is like they're moving around in different ways, right? Also, there's a tiny bit of that sub oscillator there. filters, and then we got our amp envelopes, basically the same. There's that LFO that's on the pitch of oscillator 2, and then just a bit of vibrato to give it some life. Then we just have a pretty high dry wet reverb. That's another secret for making these string sounds from scratch. Like if you turn it off, you're starting to hear that it's a saw wave, right? But then when you bring in this reverb, and that's, again, it's about simulating the sound. It's like, well, what happens? Well, if you take a bow and you bow a violin, for example, it's very like, it's almost ambient like that, right? Like it kind of creates these overtones. So the reverb is doing that. Then we just have a side chain, a compressor, side chaining it to the kick. And then we got this little stab. So I noticed these in a lot of these tracks. It's almost like these like hard groove, kind of old school stabs. I've been using a lot of genres of electronic music, not just hard groove, but definitely in hard groove they're having their light right now. It's really simple. These are really more about tuning them. Just, you know, I've got it tuned to this note that works really well against the other stuff. And it's a cool way to kind of use some samples from the old school in a modern way. For the effects on this, it's just going through a bit of reverb. Since these hit really sparsely, like you just get one and then it rings out, a bunch of reverb is good. If these were going to be more frequent, maybe I wouldn't, but this works well. And then we're just side chaining it. And then we got our drums. So it starts with our main drums, the hi-hat and the clap. You can hear these are both massive. I think with the hard house sound, you want like huge kick, huge hi-hat, huge clap. It's not any minimal, like little tiny anything. It's like you just want that big fat. You know, this is a very aggressive, crunchy clap. And so you get those down right, like kind of already having your drums, and I'll play the bass line too. You see, those have no processing. The clap, I did make it a little shorter with the amp envelope, but, you know, no processing required. Just get the right sounds and turn them up louder. And then you can go and add in a little bit of loops. Which obviously you can hear fill in the percussion and give it some life. These are absolutely essential for the hard house sound. I haven't heard a single hard house track, both old and modern, that doesn't feature these. The way you do it is you get like a house loop, like this one right here. I think a lot back in the day they were literally just sampling out of house tracks. Nowadays we have different libraries. This is one of the ones from my sample pack. And you just speed it up and then high pass it. And then same deal with these, but these are a little more complex. These are like these rave loops from one of my sample packs, which is basically like what I showed you with that house loop, but there's a lot more work done to them and automation and layering and stuff. And so here I've got 3 of those in a group. And they're being side chained and high passed together to kind of create one loop. And again, these are really essential. Like, check out the whole mix without the loops. It definitely smacks, but when you add them, it just like really makes you dance. And the last thing we got here is the vocal. Now, the way I noticed in a lot of these tracks the vocals are being done is that it's actually just kind of like little vocal hits like this. Always there, change gonna come. Right, you can see I've put these like on the grid so that they'll fit with the beat and stuff. But you just get these little hits that are all going to be in the same key. You can see I pitched, all of them are pitched to like work together, right? Like they're not just gonna magically work. You have to like sit and do this. But then you have all these little vocals and they hit enough to where it kind of becomes a new sort of hook, but it's not like sitting down and getting like one vocal. You can definitely do that. There's plenty of hard house tracks that do that. But as far as like how to like get, you know, samples and kind of make your own thing here, this is how you do it. You just get like you know. You know, they all work together, and then you're creating a verse out of that. And then for effects on there, you can put a little bit of delay and reverb. I think these slower delays, like quarter notes, even half notes, you know, like slow delays like that, and then let it ring out, plus the reverb. And you want the delay into the reverb, so you're kind of getting the reverb on all the delay trails. Then a high pass filter, very important. You need this to really not take up a lot of room that the other instruments need to take up. And then just a sidechain. And yeah, I recommend sidechaining your vocals. I think it's a really good way to just make the whole beat really bounce together. And yeah, so that's going to be it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed. As always, make sure to like this video as well as subscribe. And let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Like I said in the beginning, you can get this full template, the project files, samples, MIDI, presets, everything from this video is available at the top of the description on my website. Thanks for the support, guys. I really don't make a whole lot off of YouTube. I think if you guys saw the AdSense money, you'd probably laugh. But with these sample packs and with all this stuff, I'm able to keep going and keep bringing you guys new videos every single day that we all need to see. So thanks for the support, everybody. Every little bit helps, and I will see you tomorrow with another video.